So I want to start off with the colonial, or at least start a discussion of the colonial societies within the Americas. And you'll see that the purpose behind these colonies is going to be vastly different based upon the needs, the wants, the desires of the Europeans in particular that are going to be colonizing them. And again, as usual, make sure you're highlighting and following along, like with the notes, highlights and stars need to be. So to start off with here, the Europeans did not just conquer and govern established societies, they created wholly new societies. Once they come in and take over, they're going to create something completely and totally unrecognizable to the people that they had conquered. I mean, yes, there's still going to be some aspects of the old still there, but it's going to be few and far between. And even the old that still exists is going to be very Europeanized. It's going to be very Christianized. They're going to try to make it as close to what they would have at home as they possibly can. And of course, it's not going to be a completely and totally perfect fit because it's not going to be able to be completely and totally European because you still have these elements of these old societies as well as bringing in new people to these societies that don't exist within regular European society. All of these colonies in the Americas are going to be shaped by mercantilism. And this is the theory that government should encourage exports and accumulate bullion to serve their countries. In other words, and you want to put this here next to number one, you want to put, please, that the government controlled the economies. The government controlled the economy. What mercantilism does is that it values the accumulation of bullion, meaning gold and silver. The more gold and silver your country has, the better. And you want to constantly accumulate, so you want to be selling more than buying. So under mercantilism, we're going to shape policies for our country to make sure that we continue to accumulate as much gold and silver as humanly possible. Part of this, by the way, is going to be tariffs. So people want to buy domestically made things rather than foreign made items because the foreign made items will just simply go and will cost more. The other thing I want to mention here, and again, we'll kind of talk about it off and on, is that women are going to experience colonial intrusion in quite distinct ways. Like, for example, elite women, these are upper class women, are often going to marry Spanish conquerors as a way of cementing relationships, as a way of preserving their status. You'll have these noble Aztec or Incan women, or anybody for that matter, going and marrying some of their Spanish conquerors so they're able to still maintain some type of social position, political power, wealth, that type of thing. And in general, regardless of social class, many women are going to experience sexual violence and abuse, especially at the hands of the conquerors. And in fact, you're going to have a large or a growing population of multi-ethnic and multiracial children that are going to come as a result of this sexual violence and this abuse. So to start off here, again, you're probably fairly familiar with it, is the Aztecs and the Incans. And again, Spanish conquest of the Aztecs and the Incans is going to be the early part of the 16th century, so early 1500s. And within a century, the Spaniards established major cities, universities, and a religious and bureaucratic infrastructure. I mean, these guys go hard pretty quickly. They are on this speedboat to trying to create an empire, and they successfully do so. The economic basis of the colonial society was commercial agriculture and mining, gold and silver. Again, we're not necessarily doing anything surprising here. The area was quite wealthy, or rather is quite wealthy, with natural resources like gold and silver if we're in the Incan Empire. And there's also a large farming population already existing there. Because think, if we're able to support these large empires with these large populations, we have to have good farming territory here as well. We do eventually see the rise of a very distinctive social order. And you want to add here to number 3, you want to put, please, here that this showed the diversity of the colony. This showed the diversity of the colony. And just a heads up, we have a couple notes that are going to go here with A through F. So you might want to put like one note on one side and another note on another side, or write teeny tiny, your call. There will be some replication of the Spanish class hierarchy because you do have Spaniards there. And not only do you have Spaniards, but you also will have their children there. So these guys will be at the very, very top of the social structure. At the very top will be a group known as Peninsulars, and they will actually be Spanish from Spain. Below them are going to be a group of people known as Creoles that will actually still be Spanish, but they'll be Spanish that were born within the colonies. Eventually, some of this distinctive social order is going to accommodate the Indians or the Native Americans, the Africans, and also racially mixed people as well. So again, like I said, it's not going to be a carbon copy of European society. And it certainly isn't going to be a continuation of whatever society had been there before the Europeans show up. It's going to be some, admixture therein. And like I said, the Spanish are going to be at the top. And increasingly, they wanted a large measure of self-government from the Spanish crown. And you want to put down here next to C. And there's actually notes that go with C, E, and also F. So again, you might want to go one side, the other side. But you want to put down here next to number C that the Spanish population was divided between those born in Spain and those born in the colony. The Spanish population was divided between those born in Spain and those born in the colony. And you'll see as time goes on, there's going to be more and more issue between these two Spanish groups because the Creoles really want to govern kind of independently of the Spanish that come over to pretty much just simply serve as bureaucrats, as government workers. Below them, we have the emergence of a mestizo or a mixed race population. This is going to be a mixture, primarily, at least at the top, of Native Americans and then Spanish, and then below that is going to be Africans and Spanish. In general, there's also going to be gross abuse and exploitation of the Indians. You want to put down here next to E, underneath number 3. You want to put, please, here that church authorities often fought for better treatment. Church authorities often fought for better treatment. Ultimately, what's going to end up happening is the church is going to come out against, and then will also push the Spanish crown to actually outlaw the enslavement of the remaining indigenous population in the Americas. Like, they can no longer enslave Native Americans. This is going to be one of the many things, we'll talk about this a little bit later, that will turn the Europeans' attention to Africa and the use of African slaves. In general here, socially and racially, there's a lot more fluidity in Spanish South America, in the land of the Aztecs and the Incans, than there is in North America. And there's a couple reasons for this. So you want to put this next to F, again, either, to the left side or to the right side, your call wherever you have space. You want to put down here that there is greater social mobility. There is greater social mobility. And color was only one criteria. And color was only one criteria of social class. Because of the racial diversity. Because of the racial diversity found there. Because of the racial diversity found there. you're going to see in North America, it really is just a straight settler colony where there are Europeans coming over and they're obliterating the Native Americans. And really that's it. I mean, yes, we'll have African slaves and that type of stuff, but nowhere near to the level that is within South America, within the Spanish and within the Portuguese colonies. And we'll get to why here in a little bit. But just kind of understand that there is more of an indigenous population within what the Spanish and the Portuguese have. You also have a larger African population and a really small, proportionally, European population. So because of this, there's a lot more racial diversity. And because of that diversity, there has to be greater levels of racial fluidity. So the Spanish are going to use what is left of the Aztec and Incan empires pretty much as means by which to get agricultural products and also gold and silver. There's also going to be yet another type of colony, and these are going to be the colonies of sugar. And they're going to be found in lowland Brazil and the Caribbean, and they are going to develop again, a completely and totally different society than what we see the Spanish develop, where the Aztecs and the Incans are, and then also what the English, French, and Dutch are going to develop within North America. In these regions, and this is like part of the reason for the difference, these regions had not been home to any great civilizations and didn't have any great mineral wealth until the 1690s. So we're trying to figure out, or at least the Europeans are trying to figure out, what can we do with this area that otherwise seems kind of useless? Because there aren't any great empires that we can rape and pillage and take what's theirs as ours, and there also isn't anything immediately rewarding. This is all going to change once we get sugar. And sugar in and of itself has a little bit of a backstory, where we have Arabs introducing large-scale sugar production into the Mediterranean. And eventually here, the Europeans are going to transfer it to the Atlantic islands and the Americas, because these places, the Atlantic islands, the Caribbean, and the Americas, or where they're going in the Americas, have the exact same climate as the Mediterranean. So if sugar can grow in the Mediterranean, it's going to be able to grow in the Atlantic islands or the Caribbean, and it's going to be able to grow in the Americas as well. The Portuguese are going to dominate the world sugar market for about a century, towards the end of the 16th to towards the end of the 17th century in the Brazilian coast. Eventually here, the British, French, and Dutch in the Caribbean are going to break the Portuguese monopoly. One of the reasons for this, it's not necessarily that the British, Dutch, and French are like awesome in comparison to the Portuguese, but you want to put down here next to C underneath number 2, is that they were able to do this. They were able to do this because the Portuguese were in decline. They were able to do this because the Portuguese were in decline. One of the things that you're going to see here happens within this time period of colonization, but also new imperialism in the 19th century, is when the European mother country starts to decline, like in this case the Portuguese or later on the Spanish, their colonies will also decline. And because the European countries are so competitive with one another, the other European countries are going to jump all over their stuff and take the opportunity to become dominant. So as Portugal is kind of hitting the skids, the British, French, and Dutch are going to take this opportunity to jump on and gain an advantage with sugar production within the Caribbean. Sugar, of course, is going to transform Brazil and the Caribbean. Production is labor intensive and work best on a small scale. The nature of sugar, and you're just going to have to go with me on this, the nature of sugar works only in large plantations. We can't do little farms. Sugar is just simply too labor intensive and is just too expensive to do on a small scale. You end up spending all of your money and you end up not getting anything or very, very little in return. The only way that sugar is productive is going to be on the large scale, and it's also going to have to come with slave labor. We'll get to that here in a second. In fact, because it's only good on a large scale, it oftentimes is referred to as the first modern industry. It had always been produced with a massive use of slave labor. And you want to put down here next to C, underneath number 3, you want to put down that this was the only way sugar was profitable. This is the only way sugar was profitable. It's so labor intensive. It is so dangerous. It is such craptastic work that no one wants to do it. Or if you could get people to do it, you'd have to pay them some ridiculous amount of money to do the work. And then sugar is not going to become profitable. I mean, it's already a luxury good, so only the wealthy are able to afford it. Well, if you harvest it, or if you work the sugar plantations with wage labor rather than slave labor, all of a sudden the cost of the sugar is going to go absolutely through the roof, and only the richest of the richest of the richest are going to be able to afford it, if anybody. So it's not going to be profitable. Now, initially, the slaves that were used were a group of people from Eastern Europe called Slavs. In fact, that's how we get the whole name, slave. But eventually, when we move it to the New World, you'll see that we will end up turning to another group of people for slaves. Indians in the area, North Americans, or rather Native Americans in the area, were almost completely, totally wiped out or fled. I mean, again, you have an 85 to 90% mortality rate because of the diseases that the Europeans are bringing. So most of your population, most of your labor population is dead, and dead people don't work, just saying. Or they leave. They just pick up and they run for the hills. So these sugar planters are going to end up turning to African slaves, where 80% of all Africans enslaved in the Americas ended up in Brazil and the Caribbean. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit later. One of the reasons why so many people end up, or so many African slaves end up in Brazil and the Caribbean, is because the sugar colonies are meat grinders. The average life expectancy of a slave going into a sugar plantation is around 7 years. And if they're not worked to death, or if they don't die because of some problem within the plantation, at the end of like 5 to 7 years, these guys are beat up and they're no longer able to work as profitably as they had been before. So you're going to see that these areas of sugar plantation are actually going to have a lot more freed slaves. And again, it's not because, these guys are good guys. No, they're horrible human beings. But they're freeing the slaves, or they're freeing those slaves because they simply can't work anymore, or they can't work to kind of cost out their existence. So because we have so many Africans being sent to Brazil and the Caribbean, much more of their society is going to be of African descent. The plantation complex itself is just simply based on African slavery, eventually is going to spread to the southern parts of North America. Guys, these are the cotton plantations, rice plantations, indigo, those types of things. This is going to especially be the case. You want to put this down here next to number 6. You want to put down, this is especially when cotton becomes a cash crop. This is especially when cotton becomes a cash crop. Now, there also are going to be some other differences with slavery in North America versus within the sugar colonies. In North America, European women come earlier. So a result of this is less racial mixing, but also less tolerance towards mixed blood, because you do not necessarily have the same large populations of African slaves, so you do not have the same intermarrying or interracial relationships that you have within South America or the sugar colonies. And not necessarily these are relationships. I mean, let's face it, we're not necessarily talking about consensual relationships between the vast majority of the Europeans and the African slaves. And in general, especially in looking at comparisons with the sugar colonies, slavery in North America is going to be less harsh. And I want to sort of kind of qualify this a little bit. So you want to put a note here next to C, and this is kind of a bigger note. So you might have to put the note here in this particular area and then just draw an arrow or something. But you want to put here, please, that by 1750, slaves in North America could keep their numbers up by reproduction. By 1750, slaves in North America could keep their numbers up by reproduction. The other thing you want to add to that, just as a second note, and then I'll kind of explain both of them. Do you want to put down here for the second note that there were more opportunities, for freed blacks in Brazil. There were more opportunities for freed blacks in Brazil. And the possibility of freedom was greater. And the possibility of freedom was greater. I mean, I'm not saying that the slave experience in North America was fantastic. It was absolutely horrible. But it's not going to be the same type of level meat grinder that the sugar colonies are. The sugar colonies are going to require mostly male slaves, mostly male Africans brought in, very, very few females, so you're not going to have reproduction going on there. However, in the New World, where male and female slaves are about equally desired, you're going to be able to maintain, and also the harshness of the slave experience isn't necessarily quite as bad. You're going to be able to sustain and grow your slave population just through simple reproduction. The other thing here, and again, I kind of touched on this earlier, with Brazil especially, but also some of these Caribbean islands, because you are actually freeing slaves, these are the tired, old, used up slaves, there's more opportunity. And again, like I said before, it's not like these slave owners in the sugar colonies are great guys and are just freeing the slaves because they understand that slavery is wrong. No. Again, they're still horrible human beings. They're just simply freeing their slaves because those slaves are no longer profitable. This is a business to the sugar colonies. And if the machinery or your slave isn't working anymore, you got to get rid of them. So you just, send them on their way. The last group of colonies that the Europeans have are going to be the settler colonies in North America. And again, these are a different sort of colony that is emerging in the British colonies of New England, New York, and Pennsylvania. Like I kind of said earlier, the British came into the whole colony game late. And they got really unpromising lands. I mean, these are not lands that sort of kind of scream, oh, here you're going to be able to make, just simply a buttload of money. Instead, these aren't going to be very rewarding for a little bit of time. But again, like I said earlier, the irony is that these colonies will be more profitable for longer than anything that the Spanish or Portuguese are going to be able to get. And the other thing here is that British society is also changing more rapidly than Catholic Spain. And we have 3 reasons for this. And I need you to put this down here next to B underneath number 1. But again, you might want to go and either run it down at the bottom of the page or sort of kind of go up a little bit and draw an arrow because it is a little bit longer. It is a little bit of a list. You want to put down here for a couple reasons, and then we have 3 reasons. Again, you're putting this here next to beneath number 1 for a couple reasons. The first reason, and I'll explain them as we go, is the rise of a merchant capitalist class. The first is the rise of a merchant capitalist class. What this means is that we have more people who are interested in making money and money-making opportunities. So they are going to push their various countries, in this case, Britain, to go out and explore and find more money-making opportunities. The second reason is a major cloth industry. The second reason is a major cloth industry. The British have been producing textiles, wool, and eventually later on cotton textiles since the Middle Ages. And their textile industry is thriving. And they need more resources to continue to fulfill the needs of the textile industry. Also, the textile industry is going to give them a lot of money. And people with money like to spend their money. So you have people who are spending their money trying to make more money. So the textile money is going into trying to find, again, more economic opportunities within the New World. The third reason, and this is going to be something that we're going to have to come back to a little bit later on, but let me just give it to you and I'll do you a bare bones explanation of it. The third reason is the development of Parliament, the development of Parliament, and the breakdown of feudalism. The development of Parliament and the breakdown of feudalism. Just kind of understand this, that the English are going to be ahead of the game here, politically, socially, and economically, while Spain and also Portugal are going to kind of be stuck in the past. They're going to be locked into a feudal system a lot longer than some of these other places. So it's going to be more difficult for them to change and kind of roll with the punches as history and the colonies kind of, change everyone's relationship. We also here have a lot of British colonists who are trying to escape elements of European society. A really good example of this are going to be the Pilgrims. Think Puritans. Think anybody who is trying to avoid religious oppression from insert place here are going to go to North America. We also just in general here have simply more British settlers. I mean, North America is going to be a settler colony where in the Spanish colonies, yeah, we have Spanish there, but they're not necessarily coming there in droves. Some other things here to mention is that England was mostly Protestant and didn't proselytize like the Catholics. The English are coming over and they're not trying to convert the indigenous population to Anglicanism. They're just simply, just going and religiously kind of just letting them be. Where with the Spanish, they're bringing over the converting orders like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and eventually even the Jesuits to force the indigenous population of their territory to convert to Catholicism. We also here have the British colonies develop traditions of local self-government. These colonies are governing themselves with only minor oversight or occasional oversight from the crown. So what this means here is that the British didn't impose an elaborate bureaucracy like Spain, so the British colonies are able to be more flexible. They're able to roll with the punches a lot better than the Spanish colonies or even the Portuguese colonies will be. In fact, this is going to be such a big thing. Here next to A, underneath number 5, I'm going to put a star by that for me. Eventually here, North America gradually became dominant and more developed than South America. Again, told you there was going to be some irony here. That, yeah, the English get stuck with the, craptastic leftovers, but eventually those craptastic leftovers are going to be far superior than what the Spanish were able to do with anything in South America.